This was a pointless government shutdown. As I said from the very beginning, Democrats gained no more leverage during the government shutdown. In fact, they gave more discretion to the executive to carry out federal government operations during the shutdown. And in the end, the Democrats did not have their demands met. Instead, they agreed to a deal that Republicans had offered back in September, which basically said that we will negotiate the Obamacare subsidies with you after we fund the government. And that's the deal that Democrats ultimately agreed to, with a few smaller concessions, including reversing some of the reductions in force, meaning federal government employee layoffs that the Trump administration initiated during this government shutdown. But those reductions in force may not have happened if the Democrats hadn't let the government shut down to begin with. So what we're hearing is that the Democrats that ultimately decided to vote with Republicans to reopen the government were willing to do so from the very beginning, but Speaker Schumer had instructed Democrats to stick together as a group in an attempt to use the government shutdown as leverage to get the Republicans to extend the Obamacare COVID credits, which are scheduled to expire at the end of this year. So we basically saw politicians inflict a lot of pain on the U.S. economy, canceling many flights, with air traffic controller shortages getting worse the longer the government shutdown dragged out, and even many food stamp beneficiaries not receiving their government aid as of last Saturday, and all of which didn't help the Democrats achieve their political ends. They just caused a lot of chaos, unnecessary pain, and uncertainty. And in the end, the Democrats finally voted with Republicans to reopen the government.
The Democratic leader.
Mr. President, we asked President Trump to step in and meet with us to deliver lower health care for Americans, and instead, Donald Trump has taken the American people hostage, from cutting off food aid to hungry families and vets and seniors and kids, to manufacturing flight cancellations, to cutting off home heating aid, while he builds a billion-dollar ballroom with gold-plated toilets. Therefore, I must vote no. This health care crisis is so severe, so urgent, so devastating for families back home that I cannot in good faith support this CR that fails to address the health care crisis.
Shutdowns really are a bipartisan failure, but what we have seen in the past is that one party is the one that typically gets blamed, right? So if we go back to the shutdowns of the 90s, Newt Gingrich was the one who wound up being blamed both times for those. When Trump's first administration, it was basically blamed on Trump for holding out funding on building the wall, for example. And so I think while a lot of us are talking about the Democrats right now, I think that as we look back on this, that it will be kind of blamed as a Republican shutdown as well, largely because they were taking away something that was pretty popular, which is the ACA subsidies, and the Democrats were trying to prevent that. In general, those shutdowns they're just bad for policy, they're bad for business, and they hurt a lot of people without necessarily getting many of the policy concessions that any of the proponents actually would like to get. Chuck Schumer is going to be kind of a punching bag for people, but I think that we have to remember that he's got an incredibly difficult job. He doesn't have any powers to actually make people, whether they're Angus King or Cortez Masto or Bernie Sanders, he doesn't have any powers to make them listen to him. his job is to sit on top of this kind of fractious coalition and do his best to hold it together with, bubble gum. And so he's in just a really untenable position, but that's kind of the job of party leadership, is to be that figurehead. So you do get punched, but then you're also able to try to hold the coalition together as well as possible. He's in a tough spot as well now, though, because this has just opened up all kinds of Democratic factions that had previously been fighting behind the scenes, and now they're fighting in the headlines. And that's a real problem for the party. I think we're going to be staring down a very similar kind of situation in January. I think the Democrats need to have as much of an organizational kind of discussion as much as possible from now until then, to get their talking points down, to get a good sense of exactly what is possible. I think it's going to be very hard for them because the constituents want the Democrats to be able to deliver something like, again, the extension of the Affordable Care Act subsidies. That's something that the Republicans were never going to do. That's something that they were never going to sign on for. And so there's a certain amount of having to educate the citizens about the limits of their power, the limits of what they're able to do, but while still keeping them engaged and keeping them excited and making sure that they don't leave the party and, become independents or something else like that. And so it's a really difficult it's a difficult place to be in. But again, I think the most important thing for them is to be realistic of what they can reasonably get out of the Republicans, and to make that list cleanly developed and then also cleanly delivered in messaging to the internal parties, but then also external ones.